Season 3. Often regarded as the bottom of the barrel when it comes to the show. And do I think that's accurate? Yeah. Look, I'm not even gonna beat around the bush or anything. I already knew going into my rewatch of the season that it was definitely not going to be up to snuff with the rest of the show. Now, in all fairness, this was when Rooster Teeth had gotten around to acquiring Death Battle. Meaning, now instead of the show being a freelance indie series, they now would have a team, a budget, and most importantly, a schedule. So, no matter what, this season was going to have to be a learning experience for the crew, getting used to how they make the show work with its now much different format. Obviously now, they have gotten very comfortable with their release schedule and such, but Season 3 was kind of like changing a routine. It was going to be awkward, at least for a little while. And that wasn't the only complication going on. There was a lot of stuff happening this year with Screw Attack disbanding and such, so that probably also had an effect on this season as well. So now finally getting to the point, while I do know how Season 3 compares to other seasons, I gotta say I have a soft spot for this season. It's mostly just nostalgia, but it still had a hand in getting me giddy in the show, getting so hyped for each new episode and becoming so invested in these battles. I gotta give it props for that. So, anyways, do I really think it's that bad? Guess I'll just have to see for myself. Let's get to it. I bet you can never guess what I placed in the bottom spot.
I know not its name, but it is black.
Nuclear take incoming, but I don't think Mewtwo vs. Shadow is a very good episode. What an infamous piece of the show's history. Often regarded as the worst of the show that isn't the Antichrist of Justin vs. Rebecca. And honestly, it is really kind of a shame because I personally think that Mewtwo vs. Shadow is a really cool matchup. Dare I say it's my favorite matchup idea for both. I think that if it were done today, then it could make for a really cool episode. But unfortunately, this one just crashed and burned harder than the name of the score for Crash Bandicoot vs. Spyro the Dragon. It isn't entirely without its merits, though. There are some good shots here and there, and the death is ironically funny, although the comedic death was done way better in Vegeta vs. Shadow. And while the analyses aren't amazing, I wouldn't exactly call them bad. I still think they're overall decent. But oh my lord, pretty much everything else surrounding the animation is some of the most low-tier stuff that Death Battle has ever put out. Mewtwo's voice acting is fine all around, but Shadow's is terrible. And the thing is, he was being portrayed by someone who could do a pretty good Shadow impression. And that's because he was directed to sound badly. Apparently that was supposed to reference the Shadow the Hedgehog game, but why? I thought the point of Death Battle was seeing who wins in a fight, not who's more popular or who you like better, not degrading the loser. This episode is not helping their case on that, especially when they straight up ignore stats in the conclusion and say that Mewtwo could just erase his memory in an instant and call it a day, while ignoring the fact that they put Shadow at light speed, which is way over what they put Mewtwo at, meaning that Shadow could just speed blitz him before he got the chance. And hell, even then he's got the exact same type of win con anyway with his ability to freeze time, so there you go. I'm not one to care about the results all that much. The verdict being quote-unquote wrong is not a thing that makes an episode bad. What does make it bad, however, is poorly explaining the results or straight up even ignoring things you already said earlier. I'm sure they could have found a way for Mewtwo to win back in the day, but it really does feel like they were just fishing for win cons here. It's also no help when they call Shadow the Hedgehog the worst game ever. I know it's pretty bad, but I mean, is it really that much worse than 06? That then leads into all the controversies this episode had. I don't know everything about the situation, but from my understanding, it was an animator's last project before leaving the show, and I don't really think they had the best relations with Death Battle, so they kind of just made this in order to spite them, I guess. And that's pretty obvious when there's a good portion where literally half the background isn't even finished. That's just straight up embarrassing. Shadow barely gets any hits in during the fight, and their super forms do literally nothing except clash from a distance like 3 times. This fight was not treated that well, and again, I still think the idea is really cool. Now, of course, that doesn't mean I want a remake. Shadow already got a way better episode after this one, and I'd like to see Mewtwo fight Blackboard Greymon or Sephiroth if he comes back. Which, hopefully he does, because he definitely deserves a comeback when this was his debut. If you don't count the GOAT that is Vegeta vs. Mewtwo. At least Shadow had a much better episode to begin with that was more comedic and laid back. And it's great that we were able to get one with a more serious tone with Shadow vs. Ryuko. This episode felt like it was trying to do both sides with him, and when it comes to Shadow, you really just gotta pick and choose, because you can't really combine the two. Anyhow, that should tell you how much of a ditch this season is in, and unfortunately it doesn't really get much better for a while. Well, to end this section on a positive note, I Am All of Mewtwo is a pretty kick-ass score, despite it literally just being I Am All of Me but with Pokemon music. Man, who cares, I still like it.
I gotta hand it to him, that is in fact a drone, and a yeah.
Luis Cruz is the lead animator for Death Battle nowadays, and man, is his track record one to gawk over. This man is very, very talented in his field, I'll tell you that much. He's even responsible for one of the most beloved animations on the show, which he made all by himself. Despite all that, though, his first impression onto the show was not the greatest, I will admit. Cammy vs. Sonya isn't the giant semi-truck explosion that Mewtwo vs. Shadow was, but it still wasn't that huge of an improvement, and that isn't just for the animation. The analyses have plenty wrong with them too. I mean, this is an episode with 2 female combatants and early show boomstick. You should be able to put 2 and 2 together. At first, I was watching Cammy's analysis and thinking, hey, maybe they laid off on the horny jokes this time, before I got jump scared by the conclusion to the rundown. The analyses aren't bad, far from it, it's just there isn't much wowing me. Of course, we got the iconic Dronya, but nearly everything else barely cracked a smile out of me. And while the fight is still well done, the animation is all around fluid, it's just very unpleasant to watch. From the sprites clashing hard to the random static images they use that just don't really look that good, to the drone flashing which legitimately hurt my eyes and might not be the best for those with epileptical conditions, to the choreography just being so boring. I can barely think of a single scene or shot of note in this animation that stuck out to me. At least the death is pretty good and one of the most cool and gruesome kills for a Mortal Kombat episode, and that isn't saying much, which is honestly really sad for a series like Mortal Kombat. I can't really think of much else to bring up for this episode, really. It was just sort of another episode I had to watch. On the bright side, Luis got to animate 2 other episodes for this season that were able to show his talents a whole lot better. Oh, and he did also animate Ronald McDonald vs. Colonel Sanders, which aired a month before, so that was technically his debut on the channel, so boom, checkmate. You can watch that series on YouTube.com. That's actually good content, with great British representation.
I'm not fucking British!
Okay, there are a lot of controversial verdicts this season. Tracer vs. Scout is a complicated episode. This was the project that Torian decided to go not too crazy on in order to give himself a break. And yeah, that was well deserved given how many bangers he had been putting out recently. However, that ended up giving this episode the same sort of treatment that episodes like Batman vs. Captain America faced, where they were sort of left as placeholders to fill in a slot while they worked on some bigger projects, leaving it not turning out to its fullest potential. Of course, stuff like that happens all the time, and is even sometimes necessary in show business, especially for animation. But that still doesn't excuse the fact that those episodes, or whatever, usually don't turn out very great. The fight does have plenty of cool moments, like with Scout drinking the bonk and walking through all the bullets, and also the line he says before that is also pretty badass. And Tracer avoiding the bullet was also cool, I guess. The setup was funny and very in character. Huh. There isn't much in this fight that was making me want to return to it. Sure, it does have those few cool moments, but pretty much all of them have their complications. Why did the can opening sound effect play after the explosion had occurred? How did Tracer say an entire sentence and recharge her recall in the time it takes a bullet to travel? Just things that bring those moments down. And it doesn't help that the fight itself has nothing much to take note of. Given how these two are the speedsters and the agile ones of their group, you'd expect them to incorporate that into the fight by having them move all around the place or constantly running and dodging while shooting an array of bullet fire. But Scout just kinda stands there the entire time, only moving from his spot every once in a while, all while Tracer just randomly teleports everywhere. It makes the fight feel super underwhelming. The death is only just alright. Scout only gets a few hits in on Tracer, and those few hits are retconned by her recall, so technically she never even took any damage. And the huge killing blow that they were building up to was just the same kind of bomb as earlier. Really, this animation is just kind of a mess, and honestly, that is kind of sad since, like Vader vs. Doom, I remember loving this episode. Now, coming back to it, maybe I just thought these two getting in death battle was too cool, so I didn't care. I still think it's cool that they talk about the series in the analyses, to be fair though, but that's really the only reason I enjoyed them, so without that, they're just kind of only fine. I get that this was also a test for using very recent characters in the show, but I think that it only proved that it doesn't usually work out. Now, the main reason I see people hating this fight is because of the verdict. And yes, while I agree the conclusion is stupid given how they say Scout didn't survive those rockets head-on even though he did, plus saying the other mercenaries can't even survive one as a game mechanic is like saying that Bowser isn't as tough as you think because of some super lava that temporarily disabled Owe. Even still, the episode isn't part of Death Battle's Pandora's box like some people in the community treat it, but it is still far from being a good episode in my eyes. Glad they went back to Overwatch after letting the game actually build a bigger world for itself, and it's nice that Death Battle is looking into bringing Team Fortress 2 back with Spy vs. Agent 47 being on the Champions poll. Hope they decide to actually do that episode even though it lost the ballot. Amy vs. Ramona is way different than how I remembered it. I'm just gonna go ahead and start with that. The fight, it kind of sucks. The first part is pretty fun, it's fast-paced and has a good sense of energy. But the rest is so slow, especially the death. The entire sequence of the kill lasts 50 seconds, and all that happens is Amy creates a tornado, Ramona gets sucked into it, Amy hits her out of it and sends an arcade cabinet to crush her. That means all the shots leading up to the kill take forever to move on. And that's with stuff like Ramona randomly disconnecting her controller and staring off into space, literally nothing hitting her despite there being attack marks, and the awkward as hell static image of Amy jumping up the cabinets. Speaking of, the entire animation has so many points where things just look awkward. That, or I'm just completely lost. They either linger on shots too long, or have it be awkwardly animated to where things look slow and stiff, and when you have a Sonic character fighting in that episode, that's something you have to get right. Like I said, the first half before the Pocket Dimension shenanigans is pretty enjoyable. But even still, it has its own set of problems. Why does Amy get mad at Ramona for literally no reason, and why does Sonic do literally nothing after knocking two random people unconscious? Really, all of my problems with this animation has been said before and better plenty of times, so I'll just get into the saving grace of this episode. The analyses. Obviously, the animation is the main attraction when it comes to Death Battle, but the analyses are technically the biggest part of an episode, so you have to keep track of them too. And I'm not gonna lie, I ended up finding these rundowns really solid. Of course, they're not groundbreaking, but they do their jobs while also having plenty of funny jokes. Also, I just figured out they blurred the Cartoon Network logo in the bottom right corner of the screen, and that's way more interesting to me than it should be. Oh, and also the screen just goes complete black for a few seconds in the post-analysis too. Yeah. That was Amy Rose vs. Ramona Flowers, Sonic the Hedgehog vs. Scott Pilgrim, Season 3, Episode 11. I remember thinking that the animation was pretty good back in the day, but it does not hold up at all. It is kind of weird how Scott Pilgrim himself hasn't been on the show yet, so maybe they can bring him on sometime soon and give the series an actually tolerable episode.
Oh, hello again, Death Battle. So, who's the lucky victim?
This episode sure exists. The biggest thanks I can give it is letting Power Rangers vs. Voltron have more time to be worked on. Without that factor, then Deadpool vs. Pinkie Pie is just okay. I appreciate how it's just supposed to be fun and goofy without any sort of actual fighting or debating, but they don't really take advantage of that. And with the fight's entire gimmick being that the two can break past the fourth wall, I bet you can already expect what's gonna go on given that Deadpool is merely one of them. He was just alright, not intrusive or anything in Deadpool vs. Deathstroke, and he was used best in the analyses for Deadpool vs. The Mask, where he and the hosts have actual banter. Here, Deadpool just overstays his welcome and doesn't really have much interesting to say. He just kinda shows up to brag about himself every once in a while. And Pinkie Pie doesn't serve much better. Not only does she show up unnecessarily too, but her voice is just kind of irritating to listen to. That's not throwing shade at the voice actor. I personally think that just Pinkie's voice in the analyses is kind of annoying. In the fight, I didn't really notice myself having the same problem. The analyses themselves are okay. I did like Wiz freaking out over Toon Force and the edit that the characters actually react to. And also, I found Wiz sending Pinkie away by telling her she'll have a visitor soon to be a very clever way to connect the whole episode together. But aside from that, everything else just feels kinda bland. The fight doesn't fare much better either. There are plenty of pieces with very well done animation, and the first part of the fight with them using so many different things outside of the video as weapons or jokes. Like with Deadpool changing his words after seeing the age rating, Pinkie using the ad as a shield, and a bunch more. After the two become friends, however, is when things start to dwindle down. They go into a few older episodes to mess around with the characters and stuff, but they don't really mess around a lot. This is a concept that I constantly say that I want them to do in episodes today, because like in episodes like Goku Black vs. Reverse Flash, it's just cool to see them connect these fights together, like they're all happening in the same world. So you'd think I like this section, but it just doesn't really satisfy me. They throw Cap's shield back at him, start dancing with Terry, and do nothing in Amy vs. Ramona. The possibilities were nearly limitless with this, but they barely do anything with it. Them going into the cast, however, I found was really fun. Mostly because they actually do stuff in there. Like I said earlier, the reason I love Deadpool vs. The Mask's analyses is because of the interactions the two sides have. And Deadpool just going in and insulting the crew is all I needed. Especially with that piece of meta humor that Nick said, which always gets a chuckle out of me. The episode feels like it should be really substantial, but it just doesn't really invoke that feeling at, like, all. And yeah, I get that it was probably rushed, but like I've been saying, that doesn't excuse it from being a bad episode and an even worse finale. Actually, you know what? I wouldn't even call this episode bad. I guess just underwhelmingly mediocre. I'm praying that Bill vs. Discord isn't cursed to be mid as hell like all the other Pony episodes.
Time, huh? Thanks for Don't you fucking dare!
Again, like with Luigi vs. Tails, I don't feel like I gave this one a fair shot. I was way too hard on it. Just like that episode though, I still wouldn't really call it good necessarily, but I'm just not really proud with how I went about talking about these two in my Mario episode ranking. And to be frank, I'm not exactly pleased with how that video turned out in general, if I'm being completely honest. And I can say that for quite a bit of the videos I made in 2022. So how about we just get off this topic and give this episode a fresh, clean slate to talk about it. Alright, what do I say? Well, Bowser is one of my favorite villains and characters in general, and I really do find Ganondorf to be a cool character as well, especially for his betrayal in Tears of the Kingdom. So after just finishing that game, I was kind of excited to come back to these analyses, and they were fine. They weren't what I'd consider bad, but they also don't stick out to me in any sort of way. I guess it was just cool to hear them talk about some of my favorite video game characters, but that's really the only brownie points it's getting. Again, I still find them enjoyable, but it's just hard to find anything that I feel is worth mentioning. Then there's the conclusion, which is probably one of the worst explanations in the show's history, let alone for this season. Yeah, that's right, Mewtwo vs. Shadow's conclusion has actual competition for worst explanation. They bring up stuff they didn't even mention in the analyses, straight up contradict themselves at one point, and don't even get me started on the super lava and no limits fallacy stuff. I'm not bothered by the verdict at all, at least not anymore, but still they need to actually, convince me of the result. Now, the animation is still fine, but my main problem is how barren it feels. Let me explain. So, they go over all this stuff in the analyses, all this magic, all these powers, all these weapons, and how much of it do they use? Well, they mostly just do a bunch of punches and kicks, really. Sometimes you'll get the occasional fire or energy ball. Bowser uses the clown car for one attack that Ganon counters immediately, and Ganondorf does a lot of teleporting. That's about it. Okay, well, maybe when Bowser goes giant and Ganon comes out, then we can get some cool stuff. Bowser does one attack with his fire, gets stabbed in the eye, eats Ganon, and dies. That's it. Rewatching this episode made me realize that despite how convoluted the debate is to the point where it's a massive stomp in either direction depending on who you ask, it actually has a lot of potential for a cool fight and such. It's like Mewtwo vs. Shadow, where I still like the matchup, even though the episode didn't turn out that great. They just barely use anything and barely make an effort to try and use these two to their fullest. And even despite that, the moves they use just are way too over-reliant on Smash. The JoJo reference comes out of nowhere, too. I mean, Liam didn't even join the show until Season 5. And all in all, Bowser just gets bodied throughout most of the fight. The only time he is able to hold his own is during the tennis court sequence, which, ironically, is the best part of the fight. That's the kind of fun creativity I was wanting from this episode. And I do gotta say, the animation does look visually pleasing. I really like all the colors you would expect from a Mario episode. And I also really love the shot after Ganondorf turns to Ganon when Bowser is swinging at him, only for Ganon to block it as a black silhouette with white eyes. Oh, and I can't forget about the track. I love Olympus Mons. And even though they didn't use the lyrical version, the instrumental is still really good and fits the fight very well. Brandon was pulling out W's even back in Season 3. There's still plenty to like about this episode. I just don't really vibe with it. After looking back on it, I still think I might consider it bad, but not abysmal like the community treats it. I'm just thankful that Ganon was able to get an episode later on that was a much bigger improvement. Seriously, I'm so excited to talk about Ganon vs. Dracula once I get to my Season 6 ranking. Now all that's left is for Bowser to come back for Bowser vs. Eggman. Please, Death Battle, I'm begging you!
Alright, Flash, so you're fast. But I'm stronger and smarter.
No, you ain't!
Flash vs. Quicksilver is an episode I don't hold a lot of strong feelings for. It has plenty of things that I like about it, like the fun rundowns that had some good jokes, like with Boomstick's Dune Buggy. Though apparently this episode was what started the Boomstick's dad joke trend, so I might have to take that statement back. And it isn't just the analyses or the fight that I like this time. The animation does have plenty that I like about it too. I love the setup with the two showing up to save a girl falling off a building, which leads them to racing to Japan to see who's faster. I always thought that was a fun way to make them fight. I also love the idea of the entire fight taking place in less than a second. That was just a really cool idea and helps give a slight scale as to how fast they're moving. I like Flash's speech in the Speed Force and the final beatdown, and I also really like it when the two are just hand-drawn blurs speeding across the landscape. Besides those examples though, it's kind of hard to find anything else that sticks out. A lot of the things in the animation just look kind of awkward. I know that it's because it's limited, but Quicksilver's running animation looks just kind of weird and stiff. It's the non-moving arms that do it for me. Then there's stuff like Flash being heterochromic every once in a while, and Quicksilver bragging about how he's stronger and smarter, as if that's going to help him win in a race where his opponent is 10 times faster than the speed of light. Bro probably thinks it's tortoise in the hair or something like that. Also, just for the record, he isn't smarter or stronger than Flash. Like, not even close. And I get why there was a lack of actual fighting because of the two treating it more as a race, but I do agree that the minimal amount of fighting they do is very boring. Just a bunch of punches and kicks. They barely do anything interesting with their speed and try to take advantage of it. They do have Quicksilver making a tornado only for Flash to reverse it while inside it. That was pretty fun. Only for it to be followed by Quicksilver falling through a flock of birds. Falling through a flock of birds? What a tongue twister. Which, the sound effects make it sound like he's falling through a flock of knives. Really, this whole animation feels... What's another word for awkward? Here, give me a sec. Alright, let's see here. Maladroit. Yeah, this whole animation feels maladroit. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And yeah, I do feel that it gives it its own sort of charm, but it isn't really enough to make me have a soft spot for it. And it's all topped off by this big lead up to the kill where Quicksilver is sent hurtling towards Japan after being knocked out of the Speed Force by sheer force, only for him to die because of an unluckily placed statue. That's not even a bad death, that's just really lame. The only reason I like this kill is because of the explanation gag in Goku Black vs. Reverse Flash, which came out 5 years later. This is one of those episodes where people are just super divided on it. And while I don't necessarily think it's all that great, I also wouldn't consider it one of the worser ones of this season. It's just kind of a nothing episode to me.
Your sword smells of sword.
Okay, wow, what a big jump in quality. Zoro vs. Erza is what people consider to be the best sprite fight of the season. Hell, some people even have it near the top of their list. And I can definitely see why. It's just me personally, I never really got all that hype. Don't get me wrong, I still love the episode. I just don't really see it as the shining diamond that everyone else seems to see it as. And hey, if you do consider it that, all the props to you. Trust me, this one came very close to topping the next. And it's also what I'd consider the starting point of the quote-unquote good episodes. And we're halfway through the ranking now. I thought both rundowns were fun, some of the jokes were pretty funny, and they covered the two's characters and origins fairly well. The fight is well animated with a lot of energy and speed, and there were plenty of moments that stuck out to me, like when Zoro starts stop, drop, and rolling when he realizes he's on fire. And the fantastic death, which is a one-stroke duel that causes not only Erza to be split in half, but an entire mountain in the background. That is how you show scale. I kind of wish that the suspense was kept just a little bit longer, but what the hell, it's outweighed by how raw it is. Besides those things, pretty much everything else I thought was pretty cool, though admittedly nothing standout-ish. I like how they use the flying swords as platforms and how Zoro just gets up barely even phased after being all bloody and beaten. Though that moment is also brought down by the awkward looking anime cut. I guess the sound effects can be kind of off at points, but that's really the only big issue I noticed. I can totally see why a lot of people adore this episode, and call it one of their favorites. Either of the season, or hey, even of the show. It certainly showed us Luis's talents way better than Cammy vs. Sonya. Oh, and also Zoro's clip overlays Erza's in the prelude, that's just funny. Man, there are a lot of editing and animation errors this season.
Cause I'm just Ken Masters, the street fighting family man.
Wow, a lot of controversial verdicts this season. Ken vs. Terry is an episode I've always never considered super substantial, but I've never thought it to be bad, far from it. It's pretty much as good of an episode that you can get. Not great, just good. And for this season, I think that's quite an accomplishment. But hey, for a nice change of pace, it's actually the animation this time that carries most of the points. First off, the visuals just look stunning. The models and backgrounds smoothly blending together, as well as all the effects that go on, make this fight a very, very spectacular watch, in the visual department at least. Sure, there are points like the random anime cut for Ken, but I think it fits way better here than it did with Ragna, or Cammy, or Zoro. Given how it's on screen for only about a second, more or less, and it helps add to the impact of the Hadouken and the Power Wave collision. The only true complaint I have with the fight is how it feels too fast. It's hard to keep up when they're using new abilities with barely any rest or breathing room, and with the screen constantly shaking and effects blasting one after the other, it can sometimes be a headache to watch this fight while keeping track of what's happening. And then I just have some more general complaints, like how Ken stops to breathe but not Terry, how the kill feels kind of anticlimactic with the underwhelming reveal of the damage done to Ken after the power geyser, and how the music never fades out or anything. And I also kind of wish that the power wave actually hit Ken, because we get this huge moment where it powers through the Hadouken, and then it just passes right by on its daily commute. So there are plenty of things I can nitpick, but they're balanced out by things I like. The two's punches creating shockwaves, which causes the building to start shattering, Terry's breakdance move, Ken pulling a Johnny Cage, and the killing blow itself, which could have had more impact, but it's fine as it is. The analyses are also pretty solid. They cover both in an excellent way, and I found most of the jokes pretty funny, especially the geese one, which became a running gag on the show, which miraculously never got overplayed or annoying. The conclusion kinda sucks, as do a lot of the conclusions in this season, and also it might just be me, but it kinda looks dark for some reason, like the brightness got turned down on the footage used in the post-analysis. It bothers me for some reason. I like this one. Didn't love it, but I thought it was pretty alright all around. Just not without its own slew of problems.
I am such a freak. Society is bad. You drink water. I drink anarchy.
I see a lot of people being mixed on Joker vs. Sweet Tooth. I've never really seen anyone hate it or anything. It's just, you either love it or you just think it's okay. And as you can probably tell by its placement, I'm definitely on the former side of things. Both analyses are done really well, and I always enjoy coming back to them. I find Boomstick's hatred of clowns funny and relatable, and I just like them talking about how frickin' crazy they are and the absolute limits of their insanity. It's the fight, however, that truly makes me adore this episode, though. First off, yeah, I do agree that this matchup inherently didn't allow the two to really feel like themselves. It's kind of like if a Street Fighter fought a Transformer. You can make it work, but the two are still not going to be in a fight that they're used to. Meaning, what you can do to make it work is limited. Thankfully, though, the Death Battle team is a creative bunch, because they were really able to make this fight work. Starting with a fast-paced car battle to the two interacting while inside a barely controllable vehicle, it would be nice to see Joker come back and fight someone who could help play into how he's generally portrayed as an antagonist, but I'm satisfied with his portrayal here. Sweet Tooth's voice acting and characterization are okay, I just don't really find the big bad murderer to be that interesting of a dynamic. But Joker, man did they get him right. You can tell he's having the time of his life throughout the entire battle. And I love his cockiness and confidence even when this big, intimidating clown slasher thinks he's got him right where he wants him. Like when he's waiting for Sweet Tooth's car to get closer before using his quick thinking to shoot the wheel and cause it to spin out. And while I did say he doesn't get to do a lot of Joker stuff in the fight, the scene when he's riding in the car with Needles is the exception to that statement. Using his acid spray and electric buzzer to catch Needles off guard, and just simply saying he wants to drive before grabbing the wheel and jerking it in different directions. Even out of this moment, he still feels perfectly in character, like when he decided to press all of the buttons in the car because why not, for example. However, this does make it feel like the Joker show every now and then. Sweet Tooth does get his own moments to shine, but they're usually quickly interrupted by Joker showing off with an unexpected trap or something. That's kind of my main problem with this episode. It didn't really do a whole lot to get me interested in Needles or Twisted Metal for that matter. And maybe that's just because that Twisted Metal is kind of a weird series to analyze in a versus setting, but I digress. Even though, I still think the fight up to this point is really good. But it's still not what I consider a masterclass piece of work or anything. But then we get to the ending. First, I just gotta mention how I love the delivery of...
Okay, that's funny.
That gets me every time. Sweet Tooth knocks Joker into a building and has him on his last legs. Needles is basically untouchable now, and Joker's down and bleeding. He doesn't really have any tricks left. Except for his manipulation, convincing Needles that savoring the kill up close is the best way to finish someone off. And it works. Exactly the way Joker wanted it to. Now Sweet Tooth is right up close, ready to just end him right then and there. But all of a sudden, Joker pulls out the Joker Venom and shoots him right in the face with it. A direct hit. I know there are people saying Joker should have died from that hit, and Needles shouldn't have fallen for the manipulation, but it's all made up for by the kill itself. Seeing Joker's creepy-ass face be only barely visible as Needles' voice gets slowly quieter and quieter prepares us for the sudden burst of shock from Needles as he uncontrollably laughs to the point of suffocation, all while we can see Joker's face glitch in and out before we finally see it for the final time as Needles' hand drops to the floor, cutting to Joker laughing maniacally as the police show up, all backed up by the perfect choice of music to accompany it. Oh my lord, that death gives me chills every single time I watch it without fail. Kills on the show are usually a spectacle or just plain awesome, but barely any are what I consider to be straight up haunting. This is easily one of my favorite kills on the show. Without it, I don't think I'd like this episode nearly as much as I do. The episode as a whole is still outclassed by some of the other stuff that Torian had to offer this season, but I just can't help but love it nonetheless.
It takes two. I thought one was enough. It's not true. It takes two of us.
It really is a shame how I don't see a lot of people talking about Ratchet and Clank vs. Jak and Daxter a whole lot, because I remember really loving this episode when it released. And coming back to it, I think it holds up really well. Since it came out, I've become a huge fan of the Ratchet and Clank series. To be fair, I've only played the 2016 game and Rift Apart, but I adored both. I beat both of them twice in a New Game Plus, which is something I barely ever do. Actually, I think I might just have an Insomniac bias at this point. I haven't gotten around to delving into the Jak and Daxter series, but they seem pretty fun. I'm sure I'll get to them eventually. Since I've gotten really into one or two of the combatant series, I was excited to see this one again. And coming back to the analyses, I like them both. They did kind of stop and start a whole lot, which ruined a bit of the pacing, but it was nowhere near as obnoxious as Vader vs. Doom. The times they use it here are more for comedy's sake. And I think it works pretty well given these two series obviously being more lighthearted and goofy in nature. I thought the jokes were all around pretty funny, and that they were able to cover a good amount of their vast range of weapons and such. Leading that into the animation, it did what Bowser vs. Ganon didn't. They talked about all these things that they have in their arsenal, and they actually used most of them. Well, I mean, they don't use the entire extent of their armory and abilities, but that would have made the fight feel a bit too congested, and they used a good amount to where it doesn't really feel like they made any major cuts. It makes them feel like they're actually giving it their all. Now, aside from that point, the fight still feels ridiculously fun. Not only do they use a bunch of weapons, but they use them in such a manner to where the fight feels perfectly fast-paced. It's really hard to be bored at any moment while watching this fight. The two are constantly bringing out new stuff to counter whatever their opponent just brought out. And given that this was Death Battle's first and still only 2v2, if you don't count that one section in Dante vs. Bayonetta, their little sidekicks have obviously got to get into the fray too. While Jak and Ratchet do pull most of the weight, Clank and Daxter do help when they can. More so Clank, who assists Ratchet directly in the fight by becoming a jetpack, doing his time shenanigans to help out Ratchet out of the Light Jack's time stop, and yeah, etc. Daxter doesn't help Jak as much, but he still does what he can, which is how it works in the game, so that checks out. This episode is just pure chaotic fun, and that's the main thing I like about it. Fun. So many things happening all at once, plenty of time where we have a slight rest for a bit of comedy, only for it to get right back into the action immediately. All topping off with the Rhino 5 going on a wild rampage, shooting its ammo all over the place while 1812 Overture plays in the background. Dang, that was a perfect way to cap it all off, with the fight going even more crazy than before and each pulling out their strongest weapons. My only problem with it is how the sound effects just disappear. It wouldn't have been a problem if the music was the only sound playing, but their voices can still be heard, grunts and all. It just feels weird. Looking aside that though, I love the kill with Ratchet freezing Jak and Daxter and smashing them while the overture comes to a close and the Rhino starts shooting out fireworks, bringing all the chaos to a close. Man, what an underrated episode. I wish more people talked about it because it is really a gem hidden in plain sight. I loved revisiting it. Now, I just need General Grievous vs. Dr. Nefarious, my beloved.
What the hell is this?
It does kind of suck when one of the best episodes of the year is the season premiere, because the rest of the season just doesn't really live up to it. But on the bright side, we still have a banger episode at the start of the year. Dante vs. Bayonetta is probably my favorite premiere. Yoda vs. Mickey gives it some tough competition. It's a tough race between the two. Not only is it one of the highlights of the year, but it's also the longest. And that's because, again, unlike Bowser vs. Ganon, they actually use most of their weapons and abilities that they talked about in the analyses. There is so much going on in this animation. And just like with Ratchet and Clank vs. Jak and Daxter, it never gets boring. It's just fun. I know I say that word a lot, but I really can't think of a better way to describe it. And when Trish and Jean show up to fight tag team with them just because, even though it wasn't being taken into the result, come on, that's fun. Torian brought his A game for this one, as he does for most fights, but this one feels like he really just went to town and had a blast making it. The voice actors do pretty well too, and both Dante and Bayonetta feel perfectly in character, with Dante always treating everything like it's some sort of party, while Bayo is cocky and sees Dante as a mere obstacle. Pretty much all the interactions they have are really intuitive, like the setup, Trish asking if they'll be paid, and Dante's remark at the end about how he can't find any nice girls. Me too, buddy. There's always something interesting happening in this fight, and the two are always bringing out some new tricks along with the really smooth choreography. Really, these two just love to show off the entire time. And that is kind of why they got pitted together, so I guess that works out. Always doing these cool tricks and showing off, looking good and fancy just for the heck of it, but also to one-up each other. Like when they both show how they can stop time, with the cool visual effect of both their time stops occurring at the same time. I really gotta stop saying time so much. The only complaint I can give to the animation is the hair. Dante's looks fine because he doesn't really have a whole lot of it, and Bayo's is not that noticeably janky, but Jean and Trish's hair looks so bad. I know hair is the last thing you'd want to worry about in a fight like this, but it still just looks off to me. But if that's my biggest criticism on the fight, then that should speak volumes to how good it is. I especially love the climax with both the Devil Trigger and Madama Butterfly coming out as they fall on the face of a clock, which I know is a reference to Bayonetta, thanks to Smash Bros. And the kill is also really cool too. With a fake out, that would actually catch me off guard for a second there. But, I mean, if both got stabbed, I should have expected it. I mean, this is what Dante does every single day. And I just really like the visual of Dante throwing the rose and that being the thing that causes Bayo to just explode with style. And hey, I didn't even mention the analyses yet. They're still really good, but I just didn't really notice myself being as interested as I was in other rundowns this season. But like I said, they still have plenty of good jokes, especially in Dante's analysis. Really, the next two top this one because of what else? Personal preference. This might have been too good of a way to start the season, but that doesn't excuse the fact that it's still a damn good episode. I love it a whole lot.
Essentially, this is two very brutal men.
Hulk vs. Doomsday is my favorite Marvel vs. DC fight. Yeah, even more than Lex vs. Tony. Remember how I said that while I love a good story-driven fight and stuff like that, I'm always down to watch an animation that is just pure exhilaration, action, and excitement cranked up to the max. Yeah, this is one of those episodes. I ended up loving the analyses, like, a lot more than I thought I would for comic book characters, which usually aren't the most interesting things in the world. I thought most of the jokes were funny, thought that both of their origins got covered extensively without dragging it out, and I found they were able to talk about these two in as much detail as possible, given how limited their arsenals are. The fight is no different in my enjoyment. It's not perfect, I know that, but off the top of my head, I can't think of any major problems. The fight is just so good that it outshines every single criticism I could make for it. Obviously, that doesn't excuse them, but that's still quite impressive. Just like in Trunks vs. Silver, I could basically just summarize the entire animation just by naming all the things I thought were cool. In fact, I'll do that now. The sheer impact of every single attack helped by the sound design, the first punch causing a massive shockwave to show how they're not sugarcoating this battle, Doomsday's kick leading into him throwing a bus, only to jump up and smash it with his feet, then leading into him uppercutting Hulk that sends him hurtling through a building, Hulk using the car as boxing gloves, the thunderclap and Doomsday powering through it, the destruction of the parking garage, the giant explosion the two cause, and the entire climax with Worldbreaker Hulk. With one of the best deaths, not in the season, but the whole show, showing Doomsday mercilessly impaling Hulk over and over with his poison spikes before brutally punching his head, gradually making each swing faster and stronger, and then staring Hulk dead in the eyes, saying his name to let Hulk know his own killer's name, and swiftly ripping off Hulk's head with a single pull. God, that was savage. And you can only imagine the destruction that Doomsday is going to cause after what has already been done to the city. You can truly feel the force behind every punch, the weight behind every crumble of building or road. It's honestly just mesmerizing to watch. And the conclusion is actually really, really good, which is an extreme rarity for this season. They spent way more time than they needed to on it, but it allowed them to truly delve into the debate as much as they could. They also go over real-world science to try and decipher Hulk's anger and healing factor, which was pretty neat. I like when they do stuff like that. And also they explain Doomsday not being able to die by Hulk's hands in an actual good way. Bowser vs. Ganon. This is what I can only describe as an immaculate episode of Death Battle. I always knew this one stood above the rest of the crowd in Season 3, but I don't remember it being this good. How is it number 2 again? Well, what else? Personal preference.
That's no blue. That's ninja.
If you ask me what I think is objectively the best episode of the season, I would definitely say Hulk vs. Doomsday. However, if you know me, then you are already well aware that personal enjoyment always trumps that. And Meta vs. Carolina is just so damn fun. Remember when I said in the beginning that this is the time when Death Battle and Rooster Teeth started to merge? Well, this episode was kind of a result of that huge ordeal, with both characters being huge parts of one of Rooster Teeth's most popular series, being Red vs. Blue. And while I have never gotten around to actually watching the show, I really want to. And that's kind of how this episode is portrayed. They don't even have the episode listed on Death Battle's page on the Rooster Teeth website. It's under Red vs. Blue. It's a straight up Red vs. Blue episode. And that's why it's one of the most fun things that Death Battle has ever put out. It doesn't have the straight up best analyses in my opinion, far from it, but that is not what's being focused on at all. And even then, I can't think of any sort of problems with them. Really, what I'm focusing on is the Red vs. Blue aspect of things. Not only do we have the expertly written banter that Red vs. Blue is known for, with its own cast of characters, but also with Wiz vs. Boomstick on top of that. And while I love Wiz and Boomstick on their own, the two are obviously at their best when they're playing off the other, or another character for dialogue exchanges. And now that we have these characters here too, that allows for so much banter potential. Just seeing them stand around and talk is so much fun for absolutely no reason. And it's not just at the start where they do this, they have cutaway gags as well, which are some of the best cutaway gags in the series before cutaways were even a thing in the show. It may just be slapstick, but it's funnier than someone just getting hit for the heck of it, because we still have those interactions in playoffs. Also, there's the ragdoll physics too, that's also why it's funny. Also, I do like that they decided to keep the character appearances from the show to a minimum, as I feel using all the Reds and Blues would have just been too much. It allows them to focus on the main guys while not having to compensate for others. And the ending gag with Sarge and Boomstick, where it's heavily implied that Sarge is Boomstick's dad, with everyone except Boomstick putting two and two together, is comedic gold. The entire episode is just so enjoyable, simple as that. And I haven't even gotten to the fight yet. It's so exhilarating, the choreography is intense and exciting, the weapon play is the same. All helped by the amazing score for the episode, Slingshot, which adds to the intensity tenfold. And while the meta only speaks in unintelligible grunts, banter is still allowed to thrive with Carolina and Church constantly speaking to one another. Even just having them talk about what movie they're gonna watch shows the kind of dynamic they have. And I love how it's treated like Ryuko and Senketsu should have been treated in Season 8. Here, they make remarks towards each other, but they still work with each other. Chirps helps her out at points, gives her advice, and even expresses concern when she's down. And Church, or Epsilon, whatever you prefer I guess, is easily my favorite thing about this fight. From his aforementioned dynamic with Carolina, to his deliveries of
"Okay, seriously, what the fuck?"
and
"Oh, son of a bitch!"
The actual fighting, like I mentioned earlier, is just as good. Carolina is quicker and more skilled in martial arts, but Meta balances that out by having better weaponry and strength. And even though Meta doesn't even talk in this fight, you can still feel every emotion he's presenting. His ego and confidence makes him run towards Carolina, slamming his chest ready to fight when he loses his weapon. But when he finds out that Carolina is just too skilled, he slams the ground in anger and grabs his gun back. And despite that Carolina is always able to stay one step ahead of Meta, the hits he's able to get in really do a number on her, not being able to physically overpower him or get past his weaponry through sheer force. And that's why I love the fact that the main reason she won was thanks to her relationship with Church. Carolina's overconfidence lets her take advantage at the start, but she doesn't really know when to take a step back to think and breathe, which gets her into trouble near the end of the fight. If it wasn't for Church being there, it would have gotten the best of her. He's there to distract Meta and give Carolina a heads up or suggestions when she needs it. They not only have a good relationship, but they complement each other. The killing blow itself is just good, but like I said earlier, I love Church's line before it and how Meta just powers through multiple bullet wounds. Also, I like the attention to detail that the reason Meta stopped was because Church was the last AI fragment he was looking for. That was a nice detail. I don't know what else to say. It's an episode that I always enjoy coming back to. You all know the drill by now. It may not objectively be the best, but it's the one that I loved revisiting the most. And that's always most important when it comes to these rankings. Well, there you go. I did it. First, the big question. Do I consider the season as a whole to be bad? I'm not entirely sure. Most of the season ranges from outright awful to pretty good, while having a select few that are certified bangers. Just gonna say that I'm a pretty easy person to please. I hesitate when calling something bad because I always want to look at all the redeeming qualities first. That's partly why I'm usually pretty positive when I make a review on a recent episode, with me usually bringing it down after I've had some time to think about it, because my excitement usually overclouds all the negatives. Most of them anyway. And personally, I just don't really see myself being someone who analyzes every single frame of something to find every minute detail. I'm not that critical of a person. Like I said in my 1-year anniversary video, I started making videos because I felt like it. I do it for fun, not to make it a full-time thing or to make a huge lasting impact on the community. And no matter what, I try to be a positive person. Well, as much as I can be in these angsty and moody teenage years I'm in right now. Plus, there are people who are way more qualified to be genuine critics than little ol' me. These are all just my personal thoughts on these episodes. And even though I did say a lot of them are bad, I would be lying if I didn't say I had a lot of fun revisiting them, and that I genuinely had a good time watching them all. Watching most of them. And as I said in the intro, I have a soft spot for this season. It was a nice little nostalgia trip. While Season 3 is definitely the weakest, it's hard for me to call it an outright bad season. I think calling it mediocre could fit its description a bit more to me personally. So, I'll go with that. Next up we have Season 4, another season that is also considered kind of weak, though nowhere near as much as 3. And this is where Modern Death Battle was sort of forming to be, so I'm very intrigued for my rewatch. We'll get to it when we get to it. After I get this video out, I should be able to start on my Spider-Man video, so you can look forward to that as my next big project. Thank you so much for watching. I'm writing this before Guts vs. Dimitri. I'm hoping future me likes it. Hi, this is future Lucari Boy. Spoiler, he liked it.